right, welcome back, everybody. Our final session is a panel called Beyond Opportunity Zones. The panel will be led today by Atif Qadir. He's the founder of REDIST and host of the American Building podcast. And I think I started the day saying, have a plan and prepare that nothing will go according to plan. This panel has been in the works for about 3 years now, so excited for it to close our day today. Take it away.
Excellent, thank you very much. So thank you, Francis. My name is Atif Qadir, and I'm the founder of REDIST, a venture-backed prop tech startup focusing on access to economic development incentives. As Francis mentioned, I'm also the host of the American Building podcast, and I'm joined on the stage with my friends Alexandra Daum, Shay Hawkins, and Ashil Shah. Opportunity zones are the most well-known incentive in the commercial real estate industry. It is loved, it is hated, and the cast of people involved reads like the credits of a too-good-to-be-true Netflix show. Sean Parker, Lady Gaga's boyfriend, Steve Mnuchin, Anthony the Mooch Scaramucci, and even a brothel owner in Reno. So today I'll focus on the past and present of this fascinating and complex incentive through a presentation that cuts through all of the legalese. We will then discuss the present and the future of the incentive, leaving room for questions at the end. Overall, I want to take you beyond the misconceptions of this incentive to uncover the good, the bad, and the ugly through research, observations, and anecdotes. The U.S. House and Senate are now considering legislation to completely rehaul the incentive, so this panel is incredibly timely. There's a lot to talk about in the hour, so let's get started. An economic development incentive is simply a financial tool to address social issues through access to capital that wouldn't be available otherwise. And they can be structured as grants, debt, equity, or tax abatements, deductions, or credits, and some of those can be sold to investors. The concept of a capital gains tax incentive like OZs first entered public discourse in 2000 with the American Assembly, which is a think tank associated with Columbia. Incentives like the New York Liberty Zone in 2002 and the Gulf Opportunity Zone in 2005 tailored tax benefits to specific places to target areas with extreme disruptions to accessing capital. Sean Parker, of course, of Napster, Facebook, and Spotify fame, and his economic innovation group took these two lines of thinking and proposed the concept of offering a capital gains, tax deferral, and basis step-ups for investment in census tracts in or adjacent to low-income communities. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina proposed the legislation, which was included in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That is what became the Opportunity Zone incentive. So taking a step back, federal place-based economic development incentives like OZs have a very long history, beginning with Reconstruction, when Missouri offered tax incentives for manufacturers to relocate to the state. Policy has incredibly evolved since. In the wake of the civil rights movement, an increasingly decentralized and privatized approach to urban policy emerged with the first marquee federal place-based incentive, which you see above, the Community Development Block Grant under President Ford. That was followed by the Urban Development Action Grants under President Carter and the Low-Income Housing Tax Credits under President Reagan. The New Markets Tax Credit Program was created under President Clinton, and that brings us back to Opportunity Zones, which passed under President Trump. These types of incentives are one of the few bipartisan issues that remain today. OZs were built on the framework of the New Market Tax Credit Program, utilizing a subset of the same census tracts. We can evaluate and compare incentives using the set of criteria that you see above, namely where it is used, what it is used for, what you get, where it comes from, and how it is delivered. So, for example, New Market Tax Credits are used in low-income community census tracts for rent-generating commercial real estate, excluding multifamily. There are federal income tax credits that are currently capped at $5 billion, and they're distributed from the federal government to intermediaries. The entire process is incredibly complex. In comparison, OZs are a bit simpler. They're used in a subset of those same census tracts and are for rent-generating commercial real estate as well. They're a federal capital gains tax deferral and abatement, and their funding is uncapped and is largely from retail investors who invest in opportunity funds. Although new market tax credits may have been the starting point for OZs, in execution, they're probably more similar to the 1031 like-kind exchange or the EB-5 immigrant investor program, where I'm sure members of the audience are familiar with. The setup is revolutionary in the context of federal place-based incentives, making OZs perhaps the most decentralized and privatized one yet. The process entails the 8 steps illustrated here, and it focuses on retail investors with their capital gains that are given to opportunity funds. The opportunity funds, in turn, invest in an opportunity zone in a specific property or company. Just 5 years into the incentive, OZs have eclipsed the other marquee federal place-based tax incentives for the real estate industry in annual allocation. And in 2021, that was $29 billion for opportunity zones in comparison to the other programs that you see here. For a sense of scale, the potential pool of available capital for OZs is estimated to be $6.1 trillion of unrealized capital gains. OZ-qualified census tracts are located all across the country, totaling 8,700 low-income community and adjacent tracts. That said, OZ investment is uneven, concentrating in high population and high growth states like California, Arizona, Texas, Florida, and New York. Those 5 states together represent 1 in 3 of all OZ investment dollars last year. The top six cities by contribution to US GDP are the ones that you see above, and they together contribute 26% of the country's GDP, but collected just 15% of OZ investments made last year. Based on anecdotes like this and OZ research that is available, it seems that the winners of OZ so far are outer ring urban neighborhoods, smaller ring cities, and suburbs within commuting distance of the largest American cities and growing states. The OZ incentive was designed to work for both real estate and operating businesses. In practice, an estimated 90% of investment so far has been in real estate or related activities. Operating businesses, though they are often able to drive job growth faster and keep money circulating locally, have only gotten the remaining 10% and have actually seen a reduction quarter over the last year, despite growth in OZ capital overall. Within real estate, the most popular asset classes have been multifamily along with industrials, in sync with what Kathy Marcus said earlier today. And reflecting trends within the real estate industry, hotels and other commercial uses have formed a very small portion of OZ real estate deals. All commercial real estate is eligible, though, except sin industries. So if you're a casino developer, you're out of luck there. Let's make this incentive more tangible now. So through hosting the American Building podcast and preparing for this panel, I've had the opportunity to learn about hundreds of fascinating projects under construction across the country. For OZ projects, there seems to be a particular recipe of how to maximize the usefulness of OZ dollars and maximize the impact given the rules as they are. And that's about following real estate fundamentals and asset class demands, about layering incentives, about pairing real estate and operating businesses together, and integrating low-cost, high-output related services. The Park Kennedy multifamily project in DC and the Riverport Commerce Park in Hardyville, South Carolina, both shown here, are part of EJF Capital's portfolio and are examples of projects that do some or all of this. All of that said, there are absolutely, let's call them the outliers that don't meet the intent of the incentive. The U.S. Gold Opportunity Fund is currently warehousing $30 million in gold bars in an OZ near JFK Airport, with the logic that this is a legitimate OZ business. This is an example of an investment that should very likely fail the IRS anti-abuse rules that govern the incentive. A HuffPost writer asked a nearby restaurant owner whether their new neighbor was having a positive impact, and the owner responded by saying, "I really can't say. I don't see much going on there, and no one has even reached out. Most of our customers are just from our community, and that hasn't changed at all." There are other less egregious OZ projects, but they still have arguably minimal social impact, like self-storage facilities, Bitcoin mining, and at least one Ritz-Carlton hotel. So let's bring all of this together now. What are the specific criticisms of the program, or why do the haters hate? So first, the use of capital gains as the basis of the incentive is inherently biased. And that's because only 7% of American households have this tax obligation. And ostensibly, they're likely not living in OZs themselves. Second, capital gravitates towards opportunity zones with higher levels of income, and the argument goes that those are likely the least deserving ones. More specifically, 5% of OZs received 78% of investment last year, and 63% of OZs haven't gotten a penny yet in the program. A third, capital gravitates towards a smaller and smaller set of larger and larger opportunity fund managers. And some say that can squeeze out smaller or high-impact social investors. Fourth, the rules weren't necessarily set up to work for operating businesses, given that equity isn't a normal form of capitalization for businesses like it is in the real estate industry, and the 10-year timeline also isn't ideal. Fifth, social impact isn't specified or required. And then finally, there is no required reporting or federal oversight. All that said, what are the strengths of the incentive? First, OZs are accessing a deep pool of capital that is effectively, as I mentioned, uncapped, with the estimated $6.1 trillion available. Second, the program encourages a new and diverse pool of retail investors to participate in economic development, not just the Wall Street banks that buy tax credits. Third, there is widespread recognition of the program, meaning some areas are getting looks that otherwise wouldn't have before. And finally, there's bipartisan, bicameral support for both the original legislation as well as the proposed revisions, which we'll dive into now. So we're now going to bring the Opportunity Zone incentive to life with the three experts that we have here, including some that have helped write the incentive, as well as those that are implementing it on the public and private sector side. So Alexandra, I want to start with you. You're the Deputy Director for the Connecticut DECD, and as part of that role, you're the OZ czar. What does OZ administration look like at the state level, and what does it currently entail? And tell us about some of the challenges that you have.
Yes, thank you. So microphone good. Yes, some nods in the back. So in my role, yes, Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Economic and Community Development for the state of Connecticut. Thank you to the conference for bringing all this economic activity to Connecticut. We're
exactly,
thrilled to have any conference hosted in Connecticut. So what our office sees as our role in opportunity zones is really kind of matchmaking. We keep an inventory of, not an exhaustive inventory. As you can imagine, an exhaustive inventory of parcels and opportunity zones is a Herculean task, but we try to we have pre-qualified big projects in our opportunity zones, and usually working with the municipality to identify the highest value ones there. So we keep that inventory on our state website, and we're trying to match investors that are coming in looking for investments with those types of pre-qualified sites. I'm talking mostly in this case about real estate investments. As your slide showed a couple of minutes ago, that's largely where the interest is that we're seeing, and that's playing out nationally. So we see it as a matchmaking. We see it as an educational opportunity. So one of the pros that you had on the last slide was that this could incentivize a new pool of retail investors to do their first real estate development. That's something that I can't say I feel I've had great success with that, but it's been a real goal of mine over the last 2 years. I really feel like there's this potential to bring first-time investors that sold a business or sold a house or whatever. I would love to be able to educate those folks to take advantage of this, and so we have a lot of educational webinars, that kind of thing, as part of the Opportunity Zone program under the state. And then lastly, we have boosted all of our other incentives for Opportunity Zone properties. We do not have, like some states, we do not have a separate pool or a separate tax credit that's state specific, just for Opportunity Zone projects, but we like to boost all of our other suite of incentives so that two projects that are totally equal that come in, one's in an Opportunity Zone, it gets extra credit, whatever the case may be. So those are the three ways in which, those are the three directives I have in my job, or strategies I've been using to try to encourage investment in the state, with mixed results, which I'm happy to talk about as we move on through the panel.
Absolutely, and I think one of the points they brought up that was really fascinating is the approach that Connecticut has taken to have other incentives at the state level interact with OZs in comparison to, say, other states like Ohio, Shay's home state, which created a state-level tax credit, which was able to drive a considerable amount of additional OZ capital to them. So, Ashil, you're the managing director of the OZ funds at EJF Capital. Tell us more about these funds, including your mandates and your investors and what their interests are.
Thank you, and it's great to be here. Ashil Shah, Senior Managing Director, EJF Capital. I run the real estate practice there. We have 2 Opportunity Zone funds. We've raised about $450 million in the space. We were one of the original players. I'd probably say we're somewhere around 10 or 11, somewhere in that list. Largely, I mean, if I was talking to investors, I'd tell them think private equity, real estate fund, investing exclusively in opportunity zones. So that's from a high level, that's the best way to think about it. Because we are investing in opportunity zones, the legislation does allow you to actually buy property before it's placed in service, but we're really focused on developing. I think that's really more of the intent behind the legislation. And so that's how I describe who we are. And as many of the panelists have said already today, we're almost exclusively investing in multifamily and industrial, which is not necessarily a function of opportunity zones. The first thing investors have to get their head around is that they're making a real estate investment, because if you have no confidence in the real estate investment that you're making, the opportunity zone thing, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you get all this tax windfall if you don't make any money. So that's how I go about educating people and giving them a lens to look through when we're having a conversation.
The idea being, of course, this is a real estate investment to begin with and end with.
That's right.
So retail investors, help us get an understanding of who they actually, give us a picture of what that actually means.
Retail investors, I'll tell you that, we get investors that come in with $100,000, or we get investors that come in with several $1 million. Probably, I would say, 3 years ago, opportunity zones, you could not open a business journal or anything without seeing an article every day about opportunity zones, because I think the world, or at least the country, thought it was going to be like the new form of capital to develop America.
It was like the Kim Kardashian of real estate.
Everywhere. That has not come to bear. That has not come to bear, and very quickly, the number of players in this space, particularly intermediary, it's kind of been weeded out, and it's down to, it's been a very successful program, but it's certainly not, I don't think, lived up to all of the hype, because it has largely been a program that's driven by retail investors. I mean, of the $450 million that we've raised, we probably have 400 plus individual investors. And so it is a lot of blocking and tackling to bring on individual investors and educate them about what it is that they're investing in. But they are the ones that have capital gains. I mean, there are corporates, there are insurance companies, there are banks, there are lots of other taxable entities that have capital gains, but I would say that they've largely been on the sideline vis-a-vis making opportunity zone investments.
I think the really fascinating part is that I can't kind of say enough times the $6.1 trillion in terms of the unrealized capital gains. And I think that's representative of that, although I'm sure that makes your fund management a little harder than having one or two LPs. So let's dig more into impact, which is one of the main criticisms that people have of OZs. There is no specific definition of social impact or specific metrics to measure it in the original Opportunity Zones legislation, though that was a big part of the discourse up to its passing. Let's take the example of Connecticut. The state has deep economic stratification, particularly in cities like Bridgeport and Hartford, which have had a hard time attracting outside capital. Alexandra, how do you think about social impact, and how do you think social impact could be defined under a new version of this legislation?
Yeah, so I should say that Opportunity Zones is a part of what I do, and the other part of what I do is my title is Chief Investment Officer, but I joke that it should actually be Chief Grant Officer because the state gives out, I oversee about $200 million of state funds that go into real estate developments in the state every year. Those are largely, almost 100% in the form of grants. So we have to think about our return in a different way. We're not getting an ROI, obviously, in the traditional sense. So I think the way that we would like to be able to evaluate opportunity zone projects, and we're going to get, I think, later on in the panel into the challenges that we have in even knowing where they are in the state. But if I knew where they were, I would love to evaluate them the way that I evaluate all of the other investments that we make or grants that we make, which has a couple different metrics that we look at. We look at job creation as a result of our investments. We look at vibrancy, which I know is a hard metric, and we ourselves struggle with measuring vibrancy.
You mean like economic vibrancy?
We talk about community vibrancy, like physical vibrancy of our downtowns. So feet on the street. We're actually working with a pilot program with the Pew Foundation to try to measure feet on the street that are pedestrian traffic that's increasing or decreasing after we make an investment, because it's something I just really care about. I live in downtown New Haven, about a block from here. I really care about making all of our cities look as vibrant and well trafficked with pedestrians as New Haven is, and people shopping in shops, et cetera, et cetera. So job creation, physical vibrancy of our communities, and then we have a bunch of metrics that are on a municipality-wide level that are hard to tie directly to one specific investment, but we do track how our municipalities are improving on the Department of Economic and Community Development keeps a list of all of our cities ranked on 9 different metrics. I'm going to forget them and I won't list them all, but yeah, the obvious ones in terms of poverty, but also we look at high school education. We look at the grand list of the municipality on a per capita basis. So we would love to be able to measure our opportunity zone, the opportunity zone investments that are going on in the state. We'd love to be able to measure those the same way we measure our own investments.
Sure.
I just need to know where they are.
So the grand list, just to clarify, that refers to the property tax rolls for that area, right?
Yeah, so you take the property tax rolls for that area and then on a per capita basis.
Got it.
Because the lower the grand list, the less income the state has, that municipality has coming in, the less services they're going to be able to provide out to their residents. So that's a really big metric of how expensive, what the value of living in that municipality is to its average citizen. You're probably not going to get as much bang for your buck living there if you have a low grand list per person.
So Shay, the counter argument is that tax law isn't the place for social impact and can result in governmental overreach, whether in OZs or in previous place-based incentives. Tell us about your work as the former tax counsel for Senator Scott, and then your perspective on this counter argument given your role there.
Sure. So, as Atif mentioned, I served as tax counsel to Senator Tim Scott throughout the entire tax reform process. Senator Scott was what you call a conferee. So it's a small group of members of Congress that reconciled the House and Senate side bill to get a final bill done. So Senator Scott was responsible for drafting about one quarter of the Senate side bill, which meant I drafted it. And the Senate side bill became 80% of the final bill. We had it was a $1.5 trillion bill, or so we thought at the time. It ended up costing the government a lot less, but it was a $1.5 trillion bill, and opportunity zones was expected to cost the government $1.8 billion with a B. So Senator Scott didn't really have time to be thinking about opportunity zones. So I had to work on the drafting in my spare time, when we weren't working on the more impactful and significant tax policy. And so in that process, I did have to work closely with my boss, Senator Scott, but then also closely with folks who were not going to ultimately vote for the bill, folks like Senator Cory Booker, folks like Senator Warner from Virginia, who were supportive of opportunity zones, but weren't going to be in a situation where they could really vote for the final tax reform bill. And so in that process, we got a feel for what they envisioned as opportunity zones, accomplishing. And what they wanted it to accomplish was to drive large amounts of private capital into distressed communities, as many as possible, and as far-flung as possible. And so that was kind of the idea, was to get the money in there, right? And in terms of the, in terms of how the social impact is really secured, is they gave governors, one, the ability to select the zones, right? Because at the end of the day, Alexandra understands what Connecticut needs. Cory Booker doesn't. Donald Trump doesn't. Joe Biden doesn't. Alexandra and the governor that she works for and the local governments of Hartford and New Haven and places like that understand. So put it in their hands. And we gave Alexandra 3 non-binding criteria as she was looking to select the zones, the places where this incentive makes the impact. 1, look for areas that had a significant need, areas that saw a disruption from technology changes or outsourcing or all the things that impact the areas, urban and rural, that are suffering. So look for where there's a need. Second, look for areas where folks like Achille can turn $1 into $10, where there's an opportunity. And third, and this is very important when you're thinking about impact, look for areas where there are or will be mutually reinforcing local, state, and government policies and programs that can maximize the social impact of opportunity zones. So for instance, some people pair opportunity zones and the new markets tax credits, right? You can pair opportunity zones and community development grants. We're working on legislation to pair opportunity zones and CDFI work. So, that's just, stuff on the federal level. We talked about what they do in Ohio. In Ohio, if an opportunity zone investor makes an investment, or a non-opportunity zone investor using non-capital gains just makes an investment in one of Ohio's opportunity zones, you get a significant state income tax credit. And I know what you're thinking. Well, what if I don't live in Ohio, but I'm investing in Ohio? If you're investing in Ohio but don't live there, you can actually sell your tax credit to an Ohioan at 6 or 7 cents on the dollar, and everybody wins. The further benefit is that Ohio has a mechanism now to track opportunity zone investment and to say, look, how much money, because if you notice, we weren't on Atif's chart as one of those top locations. But now I can tell you that $700 million is coming to Ohio because we have a tracking mechanism. That mechanism can then be used for Ohio to market their opportunity zones to outside investors.
So that reporting piece is something that I think is really fascinating to dig into more in the context of the bipartisan, bicameral bill to rehaul the OZ incentive. Could you walk us through what is actually in that bill that was proposed by Senator Booker and Senator Scott in April of this year?
Sure.
I'll also bring up the criticisms because they tend to tie with the reform legislation as well.
Absolutely. And so the criticisms, those some of this stuff inherent bias, how it's looked at. A lot of this is based on sort of theoretical feelings and thoughts about opportunity zones and not hard data on where the investments are going and what impact they're having. So the original opportunity zone legislation, when I drafted the opportunity zone policy into law, I was copy pasting from a bill called the Investing in Opportunity Act 44 Republicans, 44 Democrats on the House were co-sponsors. We brought them in 2 by 2, just like Noah's Ark, by design, to demonstrate the bipartisan nature of the policy. And in that original legislation, there was transparency reporting. The Treasury Department was mandated to compare the performance after 5 years of designated opportunity zones versus the places that were eligible for Alexandra to designate here in Connecticut, but she didn't decide to designate. So let's compare like what was selected and what got investment and what wasn't. Then let's also compare the performance of opportunity zones against the broader economy as a whole, right? And then let's further require some very basic information from fund managers. How many direct jobs you expect to create, where you're investing, what the nature of the investing is. If it's operating business, what's the SIC code? If it's a real estate development project, then we need to know that. And how much you expect to invest. This is information that Ashil has to give to his investors anyway. They're going to require this information. So we're not burdening him by requiring it, but that will allow us to know where the opportunity zones dollars are going and what the impact is. So because of, we'll just say the complicated nature of Capitol Hill, I had to strip those transparency and reporting requirements out of the opportunity zone legislation that went into tax reform, with the hope that we could get a bipartisan solution to add those back in the future. And on April 7th of this year, Senator Booker and Senator Scott introduced bipartisan legislation to do just that, to add those transparency reporting requirements back. This legislation also extends the policy of opportunity zones for 2 years, right? And we hope to pass it in what they call a tax extenders package, which is just to say there's a whole bucket of tax programs that are renewed in a bipartisan way every 2 years, kind of automatically. And we want to get opportunity zones kind of into that bucket so we can be constantly renewed. And we can give Ashil some certainty going forward on how he can.
Much appreciated.
We're working hard. We're working hard. This policy also sunsets a handful of very high income census tracts that were chosen by governors, just as a part of this process. In places like New York, California, a couple in Texas, just because of the high level of income in the state and other things, some zones were selected that are basically bad headlines waiting to happen.
Stanford's campus, Brown's campus.
Yeah.
Exactly. So unfortunately, So a great example of this, one that we were able to catch early, then Governor Brown of California came this close to designating Stanford's campus as an opportunity zone. So the groans and laughter are appropriate, but they do meet the technical criteria. There's a lot of unemployment, obviously. The average income is pretty low. And so, we were able to cut that one off, but a couple slipped through. And what this would do is say, look, if you're an investor who's already got a project going there, you're okay, but we're not going to allow any additional investments in the zone. And we're going to allow those governors to designate additional zones. And the last thing that the legislation does, it has a $1 billion fund that's really focused on educating folks around a number of community development priorities, just to make sure that on this and brownfield redevelopment and a few other community development priorities, that people on the ground are up to speed.
Excellent. So, Ashil, one of the ones we're going to dig into here is reporting, the most important one of this reform legislation. So there are no requirements for reporting on the private sector side right now. How do you tackle internal reporting?
Well, you're right. There are no federal requirements at all. Being a manager of several $100 million, we take a different approach. Mm-hmm. Our investors, as it was said earlier by Shay, they do have an expectation that they want at least know about it, and we do the work to provide that for them. So we'll do an economic impact analysis. We'll do work around housing and other government incentives that are available, and so we have our own formula. But there's no written construct to it. We created our own written construct, and that's what we use.
So in this case, the legislation actually might be helpful because it might standardize the way that you actually do your reporting.
Yeah, I mean, we figured that Shay would come around one day and say, hey, what's going on? And so that wasn't a hard leap.
Yes.
And he's about to come over there and ask for it, so we actually have it.
Ahead of time.
I can't speak for every other manager, but my guess is that Shay is going to ask for it for managers above a certain dollar figure, yes, because the Opportunity Zone legislation was meant to be not just for managers of several $100 million. It was meant to be for your average, business owner that might want to, build a gas station in Kansas, and that man or woman might not have, the wherewithal to go figure out, how many jobs did they create,
right,
and
so
else.
The second item in the legislation was the sunsetting of middle-income census tracts that Shay mentioned. So more specifically, over the duration of OZs so far, 1.7 million people have migrated out of OZs since they were established. How can we square that reality with the potential that sunsetting these middle-income census tracts could reduce OZ capital that is invested overall, i.e. the highest performing census tracts are being removed?
1.7, so to square that, I mean, there are 8,700 census tracts across the country. It's like 10% of the land area of the whole country. So a function of 1.7 million people moving out of those census tracts, I mean, you could probably look at adjacent census tracts that are also not opportunity zones, and you might find, I mean, people are moving out of the Northeast and going into, I mean, people in Connecticut don't want to hear that, but people are moving out of New England. People are leaving. People are leaving, and they're going down to Raleigh, Charlotte, Nashville, Atlanta, Charleston, Jacksonville. So I don't think that that's very different from anything else that's happening in the country, but to sort of square off with sort of middle income OZs that may no longer be part of the program, I think people have to remember that it's retail investors that are making an investment, and they have a choice, and the choice is to make an investment or to not make an investment. Mm-hmm. And so they don't look at it as it's just this gift that came out of the sky and landed in their lap, because there are some handcuffs that come around this investment. And so when John Doe, wants to put in $300,000 of his money into an Opportunity Zone fund, he asks a lot of questions. And the biggest handcuff to this whole thing is that his money has to be in this fund for 10 years. So I don't know how, I mean, it all starts with the federal government, the government and Shay, they want a successful program. Successful program starts with how can big amounts of money move into the system. And so anything to make large amounts of money not move into the system is going to reduce the effectiveness of this program.
That's a really good point. So the $1 billion state and community dynamism fund that is part of the reform legislation appears to also have been proposed by Sean Parker. So if that amount of money is allocated state by state, Connecticut would get $10 million towards educating developers and other players in the system about the Opportunity Zone program. How would you go about allocating that $10 million?
Yeah, so you asked me this on Tuesday, and I promised you I would have amazing answers by today. And I
Was
don't.
ticking.
I know, exactly. So we had considered something like this on a much smaller scale 2 years ago or so to help cities ready properties to try to get sort of an approved site. We have currently an inventory of sites, but we're not confirming that they've been zoned. We're not confirming anything. We're just basically putting them on a list and that they're available and in an opportunity zone. So I think one version would be to help municipalities who are not always the owners of these sites, but kind of a good partner for us to vet who the right property owners are to work with in a municipality. Work with them to try to get sites readier for investment. Shovel ready, go through zoning, go through planning exercises. That's one version of it. Another version of it, and I don't know if this is within the guidelines, is an actual set aside fund to put money into opportunity zones, opportunity zone projects solely because they're in an opportunity zone. Because that $200 million that I mentioned earlier that we invest, it's not just a big bucket. It's 5 different buckets that have really strict parameters. One is for brownfields investment, one is for historically disadvantaged communities. So they have their really strict parameters, and none of them will just give you money simply because you're a good project in an opportunity zone. So $10 million, I don't know how much that moves the needle, but that could be something, it could be seed funding for a fund that was dedicated to opportunity zones. So I think those are my 2 broad answers, is either direct funding, probably less of an impact on more properties, or readiness funding, a smaller impact on a larger number of properties.
Excellent. So one of the smaller provisions in the reform legislation was allowing for fund-of-fund investments, which means a fund like EJF Capital could invest in smaller funds. Do you think that with this additional legislation, part of that legislation, would that encourage you to look at different geographies in terms of where you're investing, or smaller scales, or TBD?
Neither, probably not. I mean, the fund-of-fund investing gives, right now the rule is, correct me if I'm wrong, Shay, but if you have already put your money into a QOF, a Qualified Opportunity Zone fund, you have to, at that point, invest directly into the joint venture, i.e. into the property.
Yes.
So you cannot put your money into a fund and then come into another fund. So the proposed legislation is looking to square that off. And I don't actually know. I mean, there's probably a decent amount of money that, family offices come to mind of those folks that invest a lot in real estate. They want to shelter a capital gain. They put it into a Qualified Opportunity Zone fund. They haven't thought through that, okay, to invest into a Qualified Opportunity Zone fund, I've got to go find real estate development, and that may or may not be within their wheelhouse of expertise, and pulling that whole deal together, and sometimes the money they have to pay tax on it and it goes away. Those monies coming into a larger manager, I don't think at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, we're trying to make the best real estate investments that we can make, and whether there is $50 million more of capital available or $50 million less of capital available, it doesn't really change. It doesn't change.
Could I tag on to the end of that? I think that makes complete sense, and I think every real estate-focused member of OFA would say the exact same thing. The fund-of-funds kind of provision, because we tried to do it, it wasn't as a part of the original legislation, the original Investing in Opportunity Act, but we did try to do it when we drafted it in the tax reform. The folks at Ledge Council couldn't get their minds around it, so we couldn't get it done. But the reason we're trying to do it now is because the fund-of-fund structure is very, very common in operating business-focused private equity.
That's a good point.
And so we looked at that number, the 10% versus the 90%. And I think that 90% of the reason 90% of the investments are real estate is, one, real estate is lower hanging fruit, meaning the opportunities are much more clear. Two, the real estate community is much more accustomed to working with government incentives on the federal level and state level. And then three, the regulations for real estate are much more straightforward. So Treasury was able to get those out the door and get folks like a Shield running much faster than the more complicated rules around operating businesses. So for those three reasons, we see that 90%. The fund of funds will hopefully, get the traditional private equity guys and folks that think in those terms, the operating business version of a Shield, get them to say, okay, this looks like what I'm used to being involved in.
Excellent. And I want to note for the fourth and fifth provisions of the reform bill, that's the extension of the incentive from 2026 to 2028, and the basis step-ups, making those available again. That would lift the IRR on typical OZ multifamily deals 4 to 6%, according to Joe Scalia, who's a partner at KPMG in Philadelphia. One additional thing I wanted to add, we had the opportunity to talk to Nicole Elliott and Chris Armstrong at Holland & Knight in DC, and they gave us a little color as to how this bill will likely get passed. So adding to what Shay said earlier, the original reporting and local jobs requirements, which were a part of the original bill, were removed during the budget reconciliation part of the process because they were deemed not to have an impact on the budget by the Senate parliamentarian. So lots of kind of arcane rules with the Senate. But the idea is that the new reform legislation will be part of a bipartisan tax extender package that will likely happen during the lame duck period in Congress, which is after election and before swearing in.
When the swords are put away.
Exactly.
After the election, yeah.
So even with these changes and the potential new OZ-related incentives that we talked about a little earlier, there is the reality that attracting OZ investment isn't a passive endeavor. So what one piece of advice do you have for local governments on what they can do to attract OZ investment, and more importantly, the type of investment that they want in their cities? Let's start with Alexandra.
Sure. So I think we've said it on the stage, and it's a total adage of opportunity zones, is if a deal isn't good without the opportunity zone, it won't be good with the opportunity zone. I think you didn't say it in those exact words, but you basically said that.
No lipstick on a pig.
Yeah, it's not going to get you. It's gonna, if you're like this close to the line, it'll get you over the line. But it's not going to be enough to move the needle a lot. And so I would say the same thing that I say to my counterparts in the cities of in economic development, like what I say to them about a non-opportunity zone property is basically the same as what I say to them about an opportunity zone property. Just make it easy to do development, which is not always the case in the Northeast, which is maybe why everyone's leaving, but whatever the case may be. It's just not, our cities do not make it easy to build multifamily, which I'm focused on because that's where most of the money's gone. Like, we don't make it easy enough to do multifamily, and certainly we don't make it easy to do affordable, but that's kind of a separate conversation. So I just pave the way for your developer. If you're serious, if you really want a development, pave the way, and don't say you're going to pave the way and then actually cave to every little individual political pressure that comes up along the way.
Sure.
And it's easy for me to say. I don't have a local constituency. I have a statewide constituency, but so I know it's harder to do than it sounds. But that's the only way that you're going to consistently attract capital, consistently attract development, whether it's the opportunity zone kind or not. And that's the advice. That's the advice that I constantly give to my local counterparts, and with mixed results.
So Ashil, what would you say to that question?
I would tell Alexandra, development wants to happen in the path of growth. So it doesn't, just because there's an opportunity zone, that is not in the path of growth, don't go allocate all your time to try to make, that one development over there work, because there are 8,700 census tracts out there. Maybe, for developments that Alexandra would consider to be a success, she's not focused on a convenience store development. She wants something bigger, something that's going to have a bigger economic impact. It's probably, you have to be realistic about what is the map in the world that you're living with, and that's probably 30% of what the opportunity zones are in the state.
Yeah.
Maybe it's less
It's
in
less here, I
Connecticut.
think.
So I would say you got to focus your time and attention on those zones. Real estate's a very entrepreneurial business. People put on a real estate hat every morning and, they got a deal. They got a deal and they're going to go shop their deal. But a lot of deals don't work. And that is the entrepreneurial business of real estate. And so at some level, you have to be a filter for that and recognize that the deals that do work in the zones that are closer to the path of development, spend your time there.
Shay?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard echoes from the members of my association of what Alexandra and Sheila said. Opportunity zones will not make a bad deal good. It can make a good deal great. And so, it's not a panacea, and shouldn't be looked at as such. But the feedback I've gotten is that states that haven't, and really California is really the largest one, needs that have capital gains tax need to conform their state tax structure, their state capital gains tax structure to the federal structure. And so, 46 states have done that, and 4 haven't. So that's something that I think is like kind of an obvious no-brainer. And then also, beyond that.
Can that get done? Is there a real shot that California will conform?
What we're working on is getting the delegation, the federal delegation, on one page, on one letter to the state government, and we think that'll do it.
So finally, there's an array of incentive inspired by OZs that have been or are being proposed in Congress. And one I want to highlight before we wrap up is the Hemp Opportunity Zone Act. And that was introduced in 2020 by former Representative Riggleman of Virginia, Shield's home state. The bill permits the designation of up to 25% of low-income communities as hemp opportunity zones for hemp farming, which is a source of material for industrial-scale woven ropes. These comically named HO zones would allow for a startup tax credit for soft costs, along with an array of other tax benefits. Hemp and marijuana, which are together cannabis, are touchy subjects with the federal OZ program since they fall under sin businesses under the guidance of the Trump administration and are not high on the list of changes being discussed for OZ reform. Cannabis is still illegal on the federal level, but is big business, with U.S. cannabis sales already topping $11 billion per year, with 15% year-over-year growth expected over the next decade. This topic weaves together real estate with healthcare, criminal justice, race, and class, and could be hashed out in an entire panel on its own. So with that, I would love to take any questions that folks have. Please.
I'm wondering what, I guess yeah, it's clear why the opportunity zones are popular and on both parties, because it's sort of like pork, but without calling it pork. It's like you can allocate money all over the place.
Exactly.
And there isn't a lot of transparency. I'm wondering if there's any specific objectives on a national level or on a local level, and what metrics or benchmarks there might be to see if we've actually reached those goals.
So in terms of the metrics, the Treasury Department is measuring, they have a kind of a bank of specific criteria that they're going to measure the performance of the zone, the designated zones, say, versus the non-designated zones. The zones are areas with a poverty rate, above 20%, and with a average income of less than 80% of the state average. If you're looking at places like New York, then they use a metro average, So the idea is that they'll look at criteria. I mean, there's probably 20, but a few, is poverty rates, the average home price, and that's important because 60% of the folks, 60% of the folks in opportunity zones are actually homeowners. So if you look at a place like Cleveland, people actually want their prices to rise, right? And you can double the population without gentrification. They'll look at access to services. In urban opportunity zones, a huge issue is food deserts. And then they do a whole bank of quality of life measures, so anything from crime to, So just think about if a place is a crappy place, and you could quantify that with 20 measures.
To quantify the crappiness?
Yeah, exactly. Is it, was it less crappy, on the other end?
I think to add a little bit to it is, frankly, I don't think anyone has a good answer, either at the federal level or the state level. But if I were to defer to one path, it probably would be to put that in the power of the states to define what criteria actually makes sense for them, because it'll probably be quite different in Connecticut, which is a high education state, versus Florida, for example.
Yeah.
And we're doing it already for other programs.
Exactly. Please.
Thank you for that summary of the opportunity zone complexity. All the different programs that have come before that you introduced, CBD, UDAG, et cetera, what is the chance for Ashil that Oz will still be around, or will there be another flavor under the next administration? How much commitment can the real estate community give to this program based on its
The real estate community, it's not speculative. So the real estate community, today, I go to work every day, and I think that you can invest in an opportunity zone fund till year end 2026. And once you do that, you, as if you were an investor, you can actually hold your investment till 2047. So if you invested, that's on your own. But if you invested with me, I'm not going to hold it till 2047. But that's, as an investor, so that's there, and I don't foresee there's any chance that that's going away. So there is this opportunity that Shay's been talking about, where this new legislation will actually just push it out to 2028. So that's not a huge difference. As for what type of certainty is there around the program being renewed for a longer stint of time, I think that's probably a good reason why they're going to collect data, because with real data, someone can make a real argument as to how effective or ineffective the program has been. I would argue that these are all retail private dollars. 95% of this money is retail private dollars. There are very few pensions, and it's not like the big guys on Wall Street are throwing gobs of money at this. We all thought that would be the case, but it really has not turned out to be that. So I think it's completely up in the air if this program, if you can make a new investment into an opportunity zone through 2035 or something like that. Right now, the rule book is 2026, and so that's what we'll live with.
So I know we're approaching the end of our hour, so this has been a fantastic information-packed hour where we took the complex topic of opportunity zones and brought it down to earth. Message me on LinkedIn, and I'll send you a Notion page with the presentation deck, recommended readings, and contact information for myself and the guests here and any of the other OZ experts that I interviewed for the purposes of the panel. You can learn more about my work at REDIST at redist.us and the American Building Podcast at americanbuildingpodcast.com. Let's finish up with a round of applause for all of our incredible panelists.
It was fun.